Hi, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to today's CAFIDA webinar. We're coming to you live on April 10th. For any first timers here today, you might not know, but CAFIDA means learning in Greek. Today, you're going to be learning about the home buying process for tribal members from Marie Bonville. My name's Brooke. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also thrilled that you could join us for today's webinar. If you could just follow along as I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law pictured here. So just a friendly reminder that the materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Okay, just so you know how to interact with us during the presentation, you should see a hand tool up on your top toolbar. It'll be an icon with a hand, maybe a plus sign over it. Know that with that tool, you can raise your hand. You could signal that you agree, signal that you disagree. You could even signal that you're stepping away for a moment. And your screen should look a little similar to this graphic here. So if we look all the way down at our bottom left, that is the Files pod. So that's where you can download your copy of the slides of today's presentation, as well as a resource that Marie wanted you to have on hand, the Section 184 loan limits. So if you just hover over the item that you want, you can click on that down arrow, and that'll download it onto your device, and it'll be in your device's download section. The next pod over, it says web links up at the top. So this is where you're going to find a link to today's webinar feedback survey. You could join our weekly newsletter if you're not a member yet. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. And if you find that you don't necessarily like the Adobe Connect browser version, then you could download the app. The link for that is number 4. There's also some resources that are included throughout Marie's presentation. All the links that can be found within are also in this pod. Know that while we're going through the presentation, I will copy and paste the links into the chat box as they come up in her presentation. So you'll be able to access them that way as well. And then all the way over to the right-hand side of your screen, you have a long chat pod available. So this is how you can talk with Marie as well as the NLC staff if you need any help. You just type your message into that bottom space where it says type here, and then click on that up arrow, and it will submit into the chat, and everyone who is on the meeting has access to the chat. So we, of course, encourage you to participate through there. If you have any comments, feel free to send them. If you have any questions, absolutely send them in there. And if you are having any kind of technical difficulties, you could let me know in the chat box as well, and I will do my best to help you navigate through it. Know that a lot of times all you have to do is exit the meeting room and re-enter, and it'll usually solve the problem. But if you have any further issues, go ahead and message me in that chat box. But let's go ahead and get the chat box firing away now, if you guys would please. Let's go ahead and put in your name, where you're joining us from, your tribal affiliation, or your work or your role in Indian country. What brings you here today? And then with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our amazing instructor, Marie Bonville. Marie, I'm going to hand it off to you now.
Awesome, Brooke. Thank you so very much for that introduction. Thank you to everyone who's in attendance today. And, for anyone who wants to share this information with their coworkers or their clients, I'm really excited to talk about homeownership. It's really been a passion of mine for a very long time. As you'll see, I have worked with the Seminole Tribe of Florida in different positions, but I guess I don't have a favorite, but I did work for their education department in program management and development for vocational programming. I have worked with the youth before and done some financial wellness in regards to getting them prepared for home ownership and large purchases. But my passion has always been home ownership, and working with the Native Learning Center was a perfect fit. So as the Director of Training and Technical Assistance, the goal was to promote homeownership in all its different forms through community development, through access to resources, to information, and of course funding. For those of you who are in housing and tribal housing specifically, how difficult it can be to fund those projects. So that's a little bit about me in those roles. Currently, I am a consultant. I own both a small construction company and also a realty group in which I provide homeownership education all the time. So it's just come full circle where I get to provide this information for the communities that I love, in addition to the general population. And I will say it's connected me to a mindset that I didn't have before, having worked for the general public. There's a lot of myths to homeownership that we in Indian country are also combating. Sometimes there are industry practices that we could benefit from if we learned a little bit more about the industry as a whole. So some of my conversation isn't just low income, no income, in that there is a group of individuals, working professionals within Indian country that also are in desperate need for housing. And so the idea that we can bring them options for those that are maybe not eligible for those other programmings is helpful. So a little bit about today, we're going to talk about the homeownership process for a tribal member, both on and off reservation. We are going to talk about the practice of evaluating yourself for homeownership. So I like the fact that this is, although we've got some housing professionals in the room, if you wanted to turn this on and show it to a client, you would be giving them a good kind of start to the process. The objectives, we'll talk about saving, spending, and their debt to income, how important that ratio is to affordability. We'll talk about what it is to develop a team, right? So a lot of times they're just going from organization to organization to organization getting information. So they might get some homeownership information from you, they might get some information from their loan officer, but how do you develop a team? How does everybody help in this process? And I really think that it's important that we look at developing a team. Of course, with housing, you want to make sure you're providing your clients with 3 or more contacts, right? So you're not choosing who they select as a loan officer. You're not choosing who they select as a real estate agent or other professionals like insurance, but you are assisting them in getting this information because you don't want them to be someone's learning curve. Hopefully, the folks that you've worked with in the past have shown a record of working in tribal communities, and it just makes for a really easy contract to close. So that's the very last part, is we talk a little bit about how to make an offer. What does it look like to make an offer? What are the motivations behind offers and accepting an offer? Next week, I'll talk about selling a home, both on and off a reservation. So that'll also help you get a clear understanding of where motivations come from. But we have to talk about inspections, appraisals, and the actual closing process. A lot of times we're so busy getting folks ready for homeownership through credit repair and that conversation that we forget about all the other little details that will help them feel more confident. So most of the materials I use come from these 2 curriculums: Building Native Communities through First Nations OESTA, and then Pathways Home, of course, which is a Native homeownership guide. It has all the tools, but it's very comprehensive. I mean, each one of these trainings takes about, you could do 3 to 7 full days of training. You could do 2 hours a week for 12 weeks, which I do in some communities. So because it's so much and we only have an hour and a half, I'm just giving you a taste of what all is available. But the links to the actual presentations are here, and I provided that for you. Also I know some folks might be having some issues with audio, it seems. The copy of the presentation will be here, and the Native Learning Center records all their presentations. So within 24 hours or so, you will see the recorded version of today's webinar. Also, because again, going back to being a balanced practitioner, I actually have the Freddie Mac Credit Smart certification as well. And so with that, I'm able to also see what industry standards are changing, right? There are things like once you've been approved for your home loan, you think you're maybe scot-free, but you find out that there's something called payment shock, which I only recently started adding to my materials. So we'll talk about those things, but I just wanted to bring that up because every so often they have what's called Credit Smart Coach, where you can actually get your certification. It's a free certification through Freddie Mac, and so I encourage you to check that out as well. It is a commitment. There are some program requirements to getting the certification, but it can really help you kind of see what the industry is talking about when it comes to financial education and home ownership. So, we all kind of know about the classics when it comes to home ownership, what money habits you tend to see, what's successful, what's not. But the home buying agenda has to look different on tribal communities, right? So it's not just money management, banking, credit reports, types of loans, and eligibility. It's the building process, right? Each reservation, each community has their own process to selecting a home site, if that's something that your tribe has available. Each community has its access to utilities, and that can sometimes be a roadblock for folks because they have, again, limiting the points of contact. You've got the home site or real estate office for the tribe. You've got BIA, right, for the tribal, the TSR, the title status report. You've got your easements, your energy efficiency options that are available through your utilities companies. You've got to actually get the utility companies to confirm that, utilities are available in the area that the tribal member is interested in putting a home. Let's talk about IHS when it comes to waste management. That's another issue that sometimes they run out of funds. And so getting waste management a part of the process early and getting that situated is important. And then, of course, if you're purchasing a home on site or, not on site, but, off reservation, I should say, then of course there are other things like seller contributions. What does that look like? Maintaining your investment. We talk a lot about insurance and the fact that a mortgage requires insurance. Banks will never lend you this money without insurance that the asset is protected. But that's another element to this. And then, of course, those loan requirements, if you're doing any sort of down payment assistance, there can be some both grants and there's some that you may have to pay back. So it just kind of depends. But getting everybody situated means we have to kind of go backwards and talk a little bit about the fact that a lot of people experienced 2008 and the Great Recession, which primarily had much to do with homeownership, and that nobody really knew what they were signing and getting themselves into. Nobody had a good understanding of interest rates, and certainly the issue with foreclosures and how a foreclosure works was a problem, right? So basic homeownership education is something that we, over the last 10 years have been fighting, 10 plus years have been fighting to make sure that homeowners, if you're ready, you need to know what it entails. So the future may look different. The pandemic increased homeownership exponentially. Folks were kind of like, I don't know what's going to happen, and I want to get into a home. Interest rates were low. We're talking 2.8, 3.1%, somewhere in there at the lowest point during the pandemic. And that meant that you just had a flood of buyers. Those that knew to go ahead and purchase a home did. And of course, that means when you have, supply and demand, when you have a demand like that, the supply diminished, right? It became harder, and the cost of the homes went up. They went up for a couple different reasons. Interest rates are one. Access to materials is one, right? I don't think builders were ready for that sort of demand. And again, it was the perfect storm. You had sellers who were kind of staying put. You didn't have as many homes to sell in the first place. And then on top of that, you've got all these buyers that drove the cost up. And if you didn't feel any more, I don't know what's the good word for it, concerned about the home buying process, you've got what they see on TV, right? It's not like HGTV. You don't see 3 houses and then make an offer and get accepted. Sometimes it looks more like this. Okay, it's a little chaotic. It's not linear. It's much more of a wait and see in different stages. And so we've got to teach our folks how to be patient, how to be organized with their documentation, how to communicate with the team. And that's why we bring out these sorts of conversations early, so that we don't have them, constantly in fear that, it's not going to go through. So just going back to what I was saying before, this is as of January 25th of 2024, but you can see the home prices rose exponentially during the pandemic. And there's reason for that. The median house, the cost of a home right now is, $350,000 on average in America. That is super high for those that are one income households, but certainly even two income households are struggling to get approved. And even if they are approved, the number of houses in that price range in that market are small. So that is also giving them some discouraging feelings about home ownership. Here's what I will say. When people talk about the interest rates now, which they're poised to go up to about 7% if they're not already there, is that in 1980, the highest on record, as long as they've been recording interest rates, was 16%. So it has been higher. That's number one, because people always ask. And the second thing is, if you look at year over year, the average of all of these equals about 6.5 to 7% when you average this all out over the last several years. Now, what I will say is that in 2008, you had the crash. And of course, then interest rates started to go down, right? A little bit about interest rates. The flow of money is something that the Federal Reserve is responsible for. So they determine the flow of money. When you hear that interest rates are being lowered or raised, it's not a direct result of the interest rates in mortgage, but it will eventually affect it. So it happens gradually, but it does happen, where once you see that there's an adjustment by the feds, then you'll see interest rates go up or down as a result. What I will say about this is that if you look to 2020, you'll notice that because we were in the middle of a pandemic, they lowered interest rates. And so they wanted the flow of money to be easy. They wanted people to have access to borrowing. And so they lowered interest rates. Well, inflation started to rise and they have to combat that. So they brought interest rates back up. And that is why we're in the situation we're in now. They're trying to adjust for inflation. They're trying to manage that. I am not an economist. I should have started there. I just really like to understand why my clients feel the way they feel and ease their mind, right? So all I can say, I never advise them if it's good for them. They have to make that decision. But all I can say is that right now, interest rates are at 6%, 7%. You can always, if homeownership is important to you and it makes sense for you financially, then you could always, lock in your current interest rate. And when interest rates lower, you can refinance. That is what I tell people. So, this number, this 2.9%, when they're kicking themselves about not having, purchased a home in 2020 or 2021, that is an anomaly. That is not normal. That is not, you can see here, it's never been done before. And unless there's something earth-shattering like a pandemic, you probably won't see those numbers again. So I don't want them to feel like they missed out on something so epic, so amazing that there's no other options for them and that they just hang home ownership up. You want to give them hope. And so, they'll tell them not to Google high interest rates, inflation, lack of inventory, building costs, or housing increases. These are all what people worry about. We want them focused on spending and saving, right? They have to lay a good foundation in order to be ready for home ownership. So I work with the South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition, their Home Buyer Readiness Committee. It's just myself and other practitioners that want to talk about home ownership. And so they have some really great resources, and I figured it'd be good to put that in the presentation as well. So if you're a practitioner, somebody who works with clients, then for sure this will help you. But there's also a buyer guide and resources for Native buyers as well. But saving and spending, that is where we have to determine our needs versus our wants, right? You might want more than 3 bedrooms, but maybe your budget will only allow for 3 bedrooms. Maybe your needs are that you need to have accessibility for elders, right? In your home. So maybe the home isn't exactly like you want it, but you can always add grab bars and maybe a walkway or a ramp, things that would be easy on an elder. So the weighing of needs versus wants, what a home has versus what it needs, these are the kinds of things you're going to be looking at. You're also going to be looking at your own personal finances and saying, does my goal of homeownership match what I'm seeing in my bank account? If I am eating out every night, if I'm going to 7-Eleven instead of going to the grocery store, right? I can go to Walmart or Costco and probably buy a 24 pack or a 50 pack of those Gatorades that my kid likes. Or I can spend $5 a pop at 7-Eleven, right? So it's just imagining what would my budget look like if I was really serious about home ownership. Maybe, and I'm saying this to the group, there's some Hulu, Netflix, there is something that you can cut out today. So if I were to give homework, that would be my homework for the night, is to check your bank account. And that's another thing. How many of us are actually looking at our bank accounts to see what transactions, what's going on, right? There could be some charges in there, duplicate charges, things that we're not aware of because we're all on e-statements and we're no longer looking at our bank statements, right? So these are the types of things I bring up with clients, but weighing your needs versus your wants is a big one. We're laying a good foundation. This is a purchase. A lot of times when I talk to folks about homeownership, they say that it's for generational wealth. It's for my family. If that's the case, if it's for the future, then the whole family has to be in the process, right? The kids got to know why we're not going to Chili's this Friday or Saturday, why we might miss out on a tournament. It's because, hey, we're going to be saving for homeownership and those events cost money. We're saving, right? If everybody's in that mindset, you're laying a great foundation, not just for yourself, but for your family. So we asked, what was your money culture, right? How did your family discuss money? What about your grandparents? Maybe some positives and some negatives. A lot of times in any household, you've got a spender and a saver. So what does that look like? And then that's how you determine and you evaluate your income versus your expenses. You really can't do that without checking your accounts and paying attention to what money you've got and that you're putting out. So there's a couple ways you can gauge home ownership and whether or not someone's ready. Of course, if you've got a student or a client that has just moved into a rental, well, then they've got at least a year's lease, right? So that could be the timeline. It could be that you've got a student who's interested in home ownership, but they plan on maybe going away. Well, then maybe it's not a good time for home ownership. So it's really important that you navigate your client and that, or if you're looking at it for yourself, that you're paying attention to what your timeline will look like, what makes sense for you. In South Dakota, where a lot of my clients are, the conversation we have is about the number of building months that we actually have. In most cases, it's manufactured housing or modular homes, and those homes have to be moved to the site. Construction has to take place at the site as far as, infrastructure, right? Utilities, these sorts of things aren't necessarily available until you select your home site. So my argument with them is, well, if we're being realistic, we need to pay attention to the number of building months that you actually have, right? Because the winters are very harsh. It's things like that we want them to be aware of so they feel comfortable knowing this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. This is something that's going to take time. And the other thing I wanted to mention, and I don't have a slide for it, but it's really important to note, if I've got some practitioners in the room, maybe you've experienced it, you can put it in the chat. But I have had it happen where you've got a mixed bag of people in your classes. You've got folks that are working professionals, maybe for the tribe. You've got folks that are in tribal housing in some sort of assisted housing, meaning their income may not be very high. You've got folks that are straight out of high school or college, and the draw is down payment assistance, right? A lot of times with these programs, the education of these programs will say, well, if you want $5,000, $10,000 in down payment assistance, you have to come to class. And I want to just think about that for a second with the practitioners and say to myself, well, that means not everyone in the class may be ready for home ownership. I just took a course last week, and the person speaking about financial education said, we're asking folks to basically financially strip down to what's going on in their bank accounts, and that can be very hard for people to do. I mean, that is when you put it like that, it's like there are going to be a lot of people that are afraid of judgment. When we start talking about credit, they shut down completely. Those that were super talkative no longer have anything to say in class. I just want to mention the fact that when we're talking about finances or financial education, that when you're in the large class setting, when you're in this home buyer education, class with different people, you might want to break it a little bit down and have some intake classes, or do like, a 101, and then from that class break it down even further to determine, groups that would be a better fit. I know that when we first started talking about homeownership, at least back when I started in 2013, the idea of having two classes was foreign, right? It's like we barely have enough money to host one class. But now with Zoom and with other opportunities, technical assistance, the Native Learning Center, I do think it's an option, and it's one we should probably pursue, because some folks are just super intimidated by being in that big class setting, and they just shut down when you start talking about finances. When you talk about finances, you'll find that in both books, they talk about fixed, flexible, and luxury spending, and it's that important. The purpose of that is that if you don't know each month what you're spending your money on, then there's no way that you can realistically track your spending. You can't make any changes unless you know what about your expenses are fixed, meaning they don't change each month. Flexible, meaning you have some wiggle room, right? Maybe T-Mobile, maybe you're spending $500 a month and you could be spending $450 if you switched, or if you asked for a better deal, or when it comes to cable, and again, those sorts of things. Then you've got luxury, which some people say entertainment, Netflix is a luxury. I would say it depends on the family, right? Because if you've got little ones, then Disney Plus is invaluable. But, for some, maybe that's a luxury and it's something they're willing to part with. In order to understand a spending plan, the ability to track, assess your spending habits, and then, of course, take action, you have to start with that fixed, flexible, and luxury spending. And of course, once you know these things, then you can take action and you can save. So I do want to talk about some common budget questions that I asked my participants. Is my budget reflecting my priorities? This kind of goes in line with financial coaching, in that we want them to be in control of how they feel about their budget. This isn't me telling them what to do, but rather having a conversation with them about their finances. So, when they say that their priority is homeownership, let's ask the question, well, is your budget reflecting your priorities? Once they realize that it is or it isn't, then it's to determine, are my needs really wants? Maybe there is a way that I can cut back. What do I pay off first? When they ask that question, here's the way I usually answer it. One, we can start to look at budget templates, right? Some people are paper and pen. Some people are comfortable with apps. But you have to calculate your income, right? You have to calculate your expenses. Obviously, if you use an app, it does it for you. And the funny thing is that banks weren't really giving you much information a couple years back, but then we started seeing apps like Mint, like Credit Karma, like what's the other one I'm thinking of? Dave Ramsey. He has a program. I think it's called Better Money. Those individuals started making money from those sorts of apps. And then the banking industry said, wait a minute, we want you all to stay within the app, right? We want you to stay within our banking services, so we'll provide you with this information. So now most banks will provide you with your credit score, your credit tracking, abilities, so you can find out like if there's an alert, if your credit has increased or decreased. It gives you that information on the apps. In this particular case, and no, this is not my account. This just gives you a breakdown. I wish it was, but it gives me a breakdown of what this person is spending each month and what they're spending it on. So it can be helpful that you look at it that way. I've provided some links regarding budgeting and budgeting tools, but again, I only have an hour left here. So the 50-20-30 rule is just kind of, once you're looking at this breakdown here, you can kind of say, okay, well, how much of my money am I spending each month on fixed expenses, on flexible expenses, and then am I paying myself back and really putting money towards savings? With budgets, you may not know, but you can start small. And I really like the done method. This comes from the Freddie Mac material, but it's define your goal, organize yourself, right? What does that goal look like? What would I need to do? What steps do I need to take? The need itself is, what do I need in order to make this a reality? What would I need? Maybe it's a second job. Maybe it's to cut back on spending. So there are certain things that you might need to do to get there. And then, of course, you get them done. And that is the goal of done. Of course, there's this other one. Make sure your goal is SMART. That's specific, measurable, right? Is it something that I can measure? In the case of those folks in South Dakota, I want to measure that. I want to say, you only have 6 building months left to the year. Do you think we'll be able to achieve your goal of homeownership within 6 months? And then once we realize that that measurable goal is not really attainable, we might want to change that to 12 months or 16 months. Achievable, of course, you know, I might say today, I want to be a millionaire. That's achievable. I've got to go through the steps of the next step of, is it realistic? Well, in what time frame? Am I saying I want to be a millionaire tomorrow? That probably won't happen unless I win the lotto. However, I can be realistic and say that I want to be a millionaire by the time I'm 50. That's 10 years from now. So I've got some time. And then, of course, timely, right? It's got to be something that I can achieve within a certain time frame, which, God willing, I will. So that's how that works. Now I'm going to ask if there are any questions about saving and spending, questions that you have for me. If not, then I'm going to go ahead and move over to credit, which is another big ticket topic that we go over in homeownership. The use of credit, especially after the pandemic, has exploded. During the pandemic, people were able to save their monies. There was a lot of saving going on. We were excited about that, but we are seeing an uptick in credit card use. And so, of course, we break down the 3 credit bureau agencies: TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. Here, I break down where they're located, and I'll tell you why. These are the nationwide consumer reporting companies, and some creditors don't report to all 3. That's important. So when you check your credit, sometimes you realize, it's not, one is showing this particular card and the others aren't. That is why, because it used to be regional. And so Equifax would handle the eastern part of the United States, and then TransUnion got in the mix, and of course, Experian is on the West Coast. Now, my big discussion with my clients is that banks are businesses and businesses sell products. And so oftentimes you have to know that credit cards are a big business when it comes to the banks. And so when you go to the bank, sometimes they'll try to sell you on a credit card. I know folks that have been burned by credit cards in the past. And so it's really important that they know that if they're trying to reestablish your credit, you can always do what's called a secured card. That means that you're going in the bank with $1,000, $500, $200, and you're telling the bank, I want to get a secured card, meaning I'm putting that money up, and if I don't pay it back, well, then you've got the $200, the $500, whatever it is. Oftentimes what I find is after they've given them, let's say it's 500, after they've given them that 500 and they've used that credit card wisely over the course of a year, they usually get that $500 back, and the credit card company will start issuing credit to them after a period of time. So secured credit cards are kind of a great way of reestablishing credit if you haven't been great at credit in the past. But there are 3 types of credit. Installment is where you're making your monthly payments. So think of your car payments are typically installment. You're paying so much each month until it's paid off. And then that's that credit goes away. Revolving is a little different. That is what credit cards are like. You have $1,000 credit limit. You can spend up to $1,000, although I don't recommend it. But if you do and you pay it off, well, then yeah, it goes back down to 0 and it's free for you to use again. Open is a little different. In agricultural communities, you'll see a lot of trade lines, right? So let's say a farmer goes and purchases things for their cattle or whatever, and so they're charging it to an open trade line, and then it obviously once the season rolls around and the farmer makes their money or the cattle rancher makes their money, then they pay it back. So that's kind of the other. It's called a open trade line, and it operates different to the others. So of course, credit scores are between 300 and 850. FICO stands for Fair Isaac Company, in case you were wondering. Those are the founders. But what is it made of, right? That's the big question. It consists of a couple things. The first thing is how you pay your bills. That's 35% of it. The amount of money you owe and the amount of available credit. So I want to pause here and talk a little bit about that. If you have $1,000 credit limit and you are spending $999 of it, that is a high utility rate, right? You're using most of it. And so the standard industry, what people say is you shouldn't be spending more than 30% of whatever your credit limit is, right? So again, going back to that $1,000 credit card, to make the math simple, that means I shouldn't carry a balance over $300 because that would make my utilization 30%, right? 500 would be 50% and so on. So try to be, if you're trying to manage your credit, let's say you do need to use the credit cards to get by this month, that would be my first goal for some folks is to say, okay, well, how can we maybe we can't pay these cards off, right? But maybe we can get under 30%. So let's look at where we're at now. Let's see what our utilization it looks like now. And let's try to get that lessened in the time that we have. Length of credit history is interesting. So a lot of folks, they get into issues with credit and they say, never again, I'm not touching it. I'm never going to get any credit cards. And I'm also going to cancel my credit cards. And then what they find after they cancel them is that it actually hurt their credit score. And this is why, because your length of credit, even if it's a store card that you got when you were in college, it's your longest running credit card, right? It's showing the length of history that you have. So even if you're now in your 50s or 60s and you still have this card, but you don't really use it, can you cancel? Sure. But just be careful. If that's your longest running credit card, you may see a temporary hit because it is the longest running credit history. I'll tell you also personally, I sold a home back in 2021 and I assumed because I'd never sold a home before, right? I was moving from state to state. And when I went to sell the home, I thought, well, cool, I'm going to pay off my balance. Certainly my credit is going to get improved. And what I found was it actually, I took a hit. I think it was like 60 points or something like that, which is kind of a lot. So I was like, I do this for a living. How could my credit go down? I was devastated, if I'm honest. And what I found is I didn't have a mix of credit. My home, I didn't have a car payment. My home was my installment. And when it was no longer there, well, then, yeah, I no longer have that as a mix of credit. It did eventually rebound, but in that moment, I had to realize that I myself am beholden to this model here. New credit card applications. This is one that, especially if you're in a home ownership setting, if you're serious about home ownership, then you're not applying for new credit cards because it'll change your financial picture. And so if it's 10% of your score, we don't want that to go towards negatively affecting your credit. So I would say, hopefully you're pretty much going to stay. What's the best way to put this? When a loan officer takes your information and runs your credit, they're taking a financial picture of your life. They want to know all of the things that you have here listed on the left. And when they do that, you don't want it to change. You definitely don't want it. It can always get better. So in that way, it can change. You want it to get better, but you don't want it to get any worse. So that financial picture can always improve. It just can't get worse. And so that's why I say it's not a good idea to apply for new credit. And so this is just the standard, like what banks think about your credit. It's not every bank, and it's not the only way to look at it, but it is the average. So pulling your credit is important. If you can do it yourself, I never want you to go to like those we fix credit, those little signs on the side of the road. Be cautious with who has access to your credit and is telling you that they can repair your credit, especially if they're charging for it. You want to try to go through your housing authority and their housing agency partners. A lot of times they have counseling services, or HUD counseling is an option. That's where you want to start, because they're free services and they're protecting your private information. Whereas when it's, a guy on the side of the road, you never know what is actually going on there. And they're charging you for it. It's not free. So a lot of times people ask, well, what stays on your credit? And this breaks it down. Of course, late payments up to 7 years, bankruptcy up to 10 years, lawsuits, tax liens, or criminal records. When I say criminal records, it's not the actual, infraction or issue. It's more so if it has any sort of financial, impact that they need to have recorded. And then inquiries. That's just a fancy way of saying if you ask for credit, if you again, going back to what I was saying before, if you go from store to store to store asking for credit, that could also hurt your credit score. Now, there are some exceptions, right? If you're shopping for a car, there's a period of time where they realize that's what's going on. And so, pulling it from different locations is not a bad thing because it's timely. Same with purchasing a home. If one loan officer pulls your credit and then 2 days later another one does it, then they know what's going on there, and they're willing to share that inquiry. But any longer than 15, 30 days, and then they're going to say, okay, this is going to take points off your credit as an inquiry. So how to improve your credit score? Pay your bills on time, pay off your debt, get current and stay current. Don't open too many accounts too quickly. Shop for rates in a focused period of time. That's exactly what I was talking about earlier. Keep balances low on revolving credit. Cannot stress that enough. Everyone after today's class, I'm issuing a lot of homework today. After class, pull out your credit cards and say, okay, my credit limit is X. My balance is Y, and see what that percentage looks like. There's tons of calculators that you can use online to do that. Check your credit report, of course. And LLC, if you wouldn't mind, if you can put annualcreditreport.com in the chat, that would be helpful because I want to make sure you're going to the right place. And then, of course, once you are able to pull your credit, then you can correct mistakes. With that, I think I'm going to break down ways to pay off credit, right? So the first one is an early win. This is basically, let's say I have 3 credit cards, one with 500, one with 1,000, one for 2,000. I'm going to start with that $500 credit card that I've got. If that's the balance, it's 500. I could probably get that done in a small period of time. I'm going to make my minimum payments on the other 2, and I'm going to hit the smaller one harder, right? I'm going to try to pay that off as quickly as I can. The other option is this debt snowball. That simply means that think of how a snowball gets bigger and bigger over time, right? So I'm going to put my debt in order of highest to lowest as far as interest rates go, right? That interest is the cost of borrowing money, right? So obviously the higher the interest rates, the more I'm paying for that money that I've borrowed, right? So I want to try to say, okay, based on interest rates, maybe I pay the one with the highest interest rates off first because it's costing me more money. So that's one other option. And then the debt avalanche is the good one for mortgages, especially. This is where you make 2 payments instead of 1. So it works well with installment payments as well. So your car payments, things like that. You're essentially saying, I'll make 2 payments instead of 1, and that can reduce my debt and allow me to pay less interest over time. So those are the 3 that we hear about the most. If there are any others that you're aware of, feel free to put them in the chat if I've got some practitioners in the room. But that gets your folks off to a good start of really attacking debt if that's an issue for them. As I was saying before, financial resiliency, the word resilience means the absorbing of shock, any sort of shock, right? So think of a glass window, and I'm from South Florida, so when we have a hurricane and something hits our window, we have resilient windows. Our windows absorb shock, and that can be harder to do when it's your finances. You can break personally. I know folks that shut down. They never check their mailbox. They never go out and see the sun. They're just shut down for various reasons. Maybe they co-signed for someone and that person stopped paying on the car, right, or on the loan. So they're frustrated. Professionally, I've seen it happen with folks. They're working every day and they're still not making ends meet, and they've had to use credit. They're using payday loans and other predatory sorts of lenders to make ends meet, and now they're digging basically a deeper hole. And then, of course, spiritually, they don't check in with family or friends. They kind of just withdraw completely. We don't want that to happen, right? So knowing that we discussed this stuff, it comes with some guilt. It comes with some frustration, anger, hopelessness, anxiety, fear, avoidance. These are all things that you'll see or you might be even experiencing. And the whole idea of mentioning it is not to bring you down, but let you know you're not alone, right? That that this is a part of the process. And once you're ready, that homeownership is still an option for you. That it's better for you to address these head on, and utilizing certain tools that we talk about. We'll get there. One of those tools is the 5 C's of credit. I won't go over it. It's definitely in all of the materials that I showed you earlier. But to break it down, you look at your capacity, right? How much debt do you have versus how much income do you make? And then you divide it. So it's easy math. It's debt divided by income. And for the purpose of homeownership, it's not debt like your T-Mobile bill or your car insurance payment. It's debt that can be that's reported on your credit. All right, that's the debt that mortgages will look at. Of course, if you're trying to purchase a car, they may look at other debts. So there's 2 other ways you can do it. But for the purpose of homeownership in this conversation, I just want you to think about all the things that are listed on your credit or your credit report. If you can go to if you can go to your apps on your phones and check out what's on your credit report, or if you pull your credit report through annualcreditreport.com, then you'll find this information to answer the question. So it's broken down there for you. Also capital, right? How much money do you have saved for a down payment? Collateral, right? This could be something that you own already outright. Conditions, right? Employment, they're going to look at your employment. They want to know how long you've been in your current employer. Do you have your W-2s, your 1099s, the things that they'll need? We're definitely, and we're in an entrepreneurial spirit place as a country where folks are starting their own businesses. And it's important to know that you can purchase a home with while having a small business, but you do have to have at least 2 years of tax returns for that business. You have to be able to show that you're claiming that income. A lot of times with small businesses, it's tough, right? Because you don't want to claim too much because then you'll have to pay more. But so they tend to write things off a lot. And know that when you're in the homeownership process, you have to show your income, right? So you may want to adjust how you're claiming certain expenses in the next few years if you're an entrepreneur, just because, again, a lot of times people don't think about this until after the fact. So they file their taxes, they go to get a loan, and then they realize they don't have enough. Real quick, I want to talk about identity theft because it is on the rise, especially when it comes to home ownership. A lot of people will have access to your emails, and so there's scams and things like that take place when it comes to your wiring information, wiring your funds to your closing attorney or to the housing authority or however the money is being sent. Sometimes the bad guys intercede in between and they say, oh, send your wire here. And they put their account information instead of yours. And I have seen that happen, unfortunately, in the past. So real quick, I'm just going to show you a video. So bear with me while I switch gears here. But I wanted to show you a video just kind of showing you what I mean when I say that it's really important that we're protecting our down payments, our savings. Think about where you're saving your money. Is it in a checking account or is it in a saving account? Let me share my screen. So hopefully everybody can see my screen now. And here it is.
Vacationers beware. Credit card scammers are setting up shop where you'd least expect it. From fast food restaurants to gas stations. They aren't actually stealing your card, just making you a target when you hand it over to pay. We've been investigating this story for months, and now one former criminal is switching sides. Here's ABC's Nick Watt for our series Nightline Investigates.
You are watching a brazen breed of credit card thief caught on tape. Miss it? Watch again. This McDonald's drive-thru attendant in Florida is swiping each credit card twice. Once to charge for the food and again through something called a skimmer, which steals the card's details. Crooks can use that info to clone your card and spend a fortune. This burger stand bandit in Boca Raton got caught, pled guilty, and is on 2 years probation. Police say he was stealing the credit card digits of up to 70 customers every single shift. They came in for a McFlurry and drove away with their bank info fleeced. But here's the thing. These electronic skimmers are now so advanced they don't even need a human to operate. This alleged crook is searching for a skimmer device installed inside a gas pump in Arizona and left. It automatically steals your credit card info if you pay at the pump. This guy caught on camera in a covert sting operation.
He put those in there, and for whatever reason, they're not there anymore. I know why, because I have them.
He's the one who tipped us off to this burgeoning crime, and he's the one who switched out that skimming device for a night vision spy camera.
We may have the first ever video of organized bad guys actually trying to retrieve their skimmers.
That's video gold.
That's where I found mine. He was stuck up here. Unless you're looking like this, you can't see it.
Ahmad Motlag recently found a skimming device inside one of his pumps. Sat there for months. He had no idea.
It looked like a little matchbox, and that's it. It was stuck on one side to the middle.
Skimming all across this country has gotten so bad that Steve Starrins and the United States Secret Service, yep, the same guys who protect the president, they are now on the case.
Are you winning the war?
It's even right now. We're doing our best. We certainly could use more help.
They're getting help from police departments, tip-offs from gas station owners, and just wait until you meet one of their former secret weapons.
Somebody turned my partner in and he turned me in.
Dan DeFilippi is a reformed credit card hacker who switched sides. He was caught by the Secret Service and then spent 2 years training agents in the dark art of skimming.
So that gives you a little taste. I've provided the link so you'll be able to finish watching that video out. But it just goes to show you how many times do we hand our check cards off to the person at Chili's or Fridays or wherever, and we don't know where they're going with our cards. You don't know when they'll be back, and you don't know where your information's going. So when people are in the homeownership process, I tend to tell them be protective of that kind of stuff. Later in the clip, it says that you should always park closest to the attendant. So those keys are the same from the eastern coast of the United States to the west, right? So meaning anybody can get a copy of those keys to those gas station areas. So it's really important to know that the closer you are, the more likely they're not able to put a skimmer in it. Or you could always go inside. Just something to think about. Just going to check the chat, make sure there's no questions. But how to avoid identity theft? Monitor your credit, of course. That's why that annual report is so important. Put on your two-factor authentication. Oh my gosh, I can't say that word. Two-factor authentication. There we go. But you definitely want to put that on. That is essentially where you get a code, you put the code in, and then it verifies you are who you say you are. Make sure that if something does happen, that you file a police report, that you contact your credit bureau so they can freeze your accounts. And then hopefully that gets resolved without you having to take drastic measures. I have seen it where folks have gotten their tax returns stolen, like their actual Social Security and their income tax has been stolen. And that's a whole host of issues to do your taxes in the future, right? So you don't want that to happen to you. A lot of the banks will do monitoring on your credit, on your email, on your passwords, things like that. So just be careful with that. So moving on to mortgages, we'll talk about the home loan itself and break it down for you, right? Because there's a lot of actors and there's a lot of terms. So first you have your loan officer, and their job is to make sure that they get your credit, your income, they want to know more about what you have out there, your assets, your employment, right? They want to get the financial choice that's in your best interest, right? So what they're going to do is you'll know that there's different sorts of loans: conventional, FHA, USDA. In the case of tribal members, they have what's called Section 184 that's available to them. Of course, if you're going to do some sort of fixing up a home, there's rehab loans as well. But down payment assistance is something the loan officer will also be aware of, like where to find help if you need it. So they are going to ask you for some documentation. I took this meme from an actual lender. This is how they talk about you when you're not in the room, right? Because they're shocked when you give them all the documents that they asked for. A lot of times it's like pulling teeth. They really don't get all the information that they need. So they want your pay stub from the last 30 days. They want your W-2 forms from the last 2 years. They want your tax return from the last 2 years. They want any other source of income, right? So that could mean child support, that could mean disability or some sort of benefits that you receive, bank statements. They want your 2 most recent bank statements. If this process, we talked about how long things can take. If it takes a year, every month they're going to ask you for your bank statements until you're finished, right? So if you let your clients know ahead of time of what to expect, they're going to feel so much more comfortable about this process. If you're getting any sort of gift from a family member or a friend, there's a term called sourced and seasoned in the banking industry. They want to know where it came from, they want to know the source, and they want to season it, right? Has it been in your bank account for more than 2 months, right? If it's been in your bank account for more than 2 months, they're not really going to question it. But if there's a deposit, a weird deposit, I'm from Miami, Florida, where, funny money exists. And so if there's some sort of large deposit in an account, it's going to trigger a conversation with the loan officer. They're going to want you to tell them where it came from and get some sort of confirmation of that. They want to make sure you didn't take out a loan to, purchase a home. I mean, that defeats the purpose. They want you to get a loan for a home outright with the monies that you have saved, right? So especially after 2008, now you can kind of see where their heads are at, is that they don't want you borrowing all the money. There's even rules regarding your down payment. The down payment itself, the majority of it has to come from you, or a percentage of it has to come from you. It can't be gifted. Let's see here. Of course, they'll ask for your social security number or some other tax ID number. And then your housing certificate of counseling, especially if you're going to be getting some sort of down payment assistance. As I said before, here are the types of loans: conventional, or also known as conforming. These are typically what you see with bigger banks or brokers. Section 184, FHA, VA or NADL, and USDA. Those are all backed by the federal government. So there's something else included with those called private mortgage insurance. And let me backtrack to kind of explain it all. So in communities of color, low-income communities, rural communities, you'll find that banks just don't exist. Again, banks are businesses and businesses sell products. So it was kind of to their disadvantage to go into those communities. They didn't want to go in those communities to serve those communities. And as a result, the government had to step in and provide those sorts of services. Now banks have what's called a duty to serve, where they are obligated to spend time, energy, and money in the communities that they have neglected for so long. So that is a good thing. But these particular programs were born out of the fact that, in most tribal communities, you might get an ATM, but Bank of America is not going to pop up shop, right? So this is to combat that. And there are some differences between each one. You would need to speak to a loan officer to get all the specifics, but in the time that we have, I do want to mention just a couple things. They all have what's called private mortgage insurance, something that means that if the bank, if the client doesn't pay the bank back, the bank can still get their money through the federal government. So that's what private mortgage insurance does. It's not protecting the buyer so much as protecting the bank, but they have lowered that. Because of the pandemic, because of affordability and how expensive everything has become, private mortgage insurance has either been reduced or it's no longer being required. So for Section 184, for example, PMI is very low. FHA, VA, USDA, those have all been reduced. Quick note, the Native American Direct Loan is specific for Native veterans. Native veterans, if they've served our country, they'll get what's called a certificate of eligibility. They can take that they get it through the VA, and then the VA will evaluate their loan. The VA is a direct lender to the Native veteran if they wanted to purchase a home on tribal trust lands. So a lot of our veterans get confused. There is a veterans loan that banks provide. There's also a Native American Direct Loan, which is a loan specific for Native veterans who want to use who want to purchase a home on tribal trust lands. So that is the big difference. Right now, the NADL is at a fixed 2.5% interest rate. That is a huge savings for our Native veterans. So I wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that, and just remind you of that if you have access to Native veterans. But kind of going back to specific to tribal members, the good thing about Section 184 is that there's no income limits, right? So you could be a tribal executive, you could be working in program management. And so, yes, you're not eligible a lot of times for those other programs, but with Section 184, there are no income limits as far as the income that you make. It's not credit score driven. It is credit driven, like they will check your credit, but they're not looking at the number. They're not looking at that score. They're looking at the contents. Private mortgage insurance is low, 0.25%. It used to be 1.25 or 2.5. I can't remember, but it was much higher than it is now. That's a fraction of the cost. Flexible underwriting. What do I mean by that? You're actually going to get reviewed by a person and not a program, right? It's going to be an actual underwriter. Most banks use some sort of software. Low down payment. So your down payment amount, even with FHA, which is for first-time home buyers or, folks that need help with their down payment, maybe they don't have a whole lot saved. I think that one's 3.5%. So Section 184 is even lower than that. We talked about debt to income and how important that is. Debt to income under Section 184 is 41%. So that is good because a conventional loan is usually 36%. It can be no more than 36%. In the case of debt to income, it's for Section 184, it's 41%. And of course, it's market rates, so they adjust. I did want to provide you with the Section 184 loan limits. That's the document that Brooke was talking about earlier. So as you'll see here, depending on where you live in the country and how many units, right? So it is available for those folks who maybe want a duplex or a triplex or a quadruplex. But, if they just wanted a single family home, 1 unit, you could use this document and go to anywhere in the country and see what the maximum loan amount would be, right? Because they're not, for example, in New York City, there's Manhattan, then there's the rest of New York, right? So not everything is eligible, but for the areas that are eligible, I wanted you to have that. All right. Real quick, let me switch gears and get rid of this altogether. Okay, cool. Any questions so far? You've been a very quiet group. No questions on homeownership. There is a question in the chat. Go ahead and feel free to ask. In the meantime, I'll talk a little bit about online calculators and just to caution yourself with them in that there's a lot of people collecting a lot of information lately. And what I find is sometimes clients will look up mortgages, lenders, they'll go to Zillow or realtor.com or something like that. And then all of a sudden they're bombarded by folks asking all sorts of questions, wanting them to get more information. Remember, banks are businesses and businesses sell products. So people do collect this information on the back end. Going back to my time, working as a homeownership professional, as a realtor, there's a lot of information being collected and they use that to their benefit. I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about less about the loan process, because I think that you'll be able to get a lot of this information with the loan officer. As I said before, they're asking for a couple different things, debt to income being one of them. Also, they want to see that your payments will make sense with a home. So there's a front end and a back end ratio. We don't have a whole lot of time to talk about those. And that's more, again, focused on the mortgage loan itself and how to qualify. So I would definitely tell you that it's best to speak to a loan officer for the specifics, but I just wanted to make sure you had it. So it's there for you to review. The question in the chat says that can a member be active duty or still get the program? And the answer is yes. They'll go through this certificate of eligibility in which you can be active, and you could also be I had one client that was he was home and then he got deployed, and so sometimes it changes the timeline on things, but as far as the approval, you can be active duty. And I can actually get that contact information once the training is over. I can put the NADL information. They've streamlined. There was some real issues with that program in the past compared to Section 184, which has been doing really well. And so the VA got with some senators out of South Dakota specifically, and the South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition, and they've done a lot of work to streamline that program for the benefit of every community in the country. So definitely I can provide you with that link to their information. Okay, we're going to kind of skip debt to income because we've talked about that. I will mention points real quick. And here I said I wasn't going to talk about loan officers much, but interest rates are high, right? So how do we combat that? If a person has saved some money, right? If they've got money in their savings account, they can buy their interest rates down. Not every loan will allow for it. I do have to say, I'm not entirely sure if Section 184 will allow you to buy down your interest rate. I'm pretty sure you can, but don't quote me on that. But the goal of buying down the rate is that you will get savings automatically put into your payment, right? You'll be able to not pay as much, right? So if you were concerned about a high mortgage payment, then this is a good way of getting around that. So in the case of this particular person here, you can see that they have a 6.5% rate. So that means their payment is $2,212. Well, if they buy it down by 1 point, which is 0.25%, then 6.25 is $3,500. That's what they'll pay up front, right? They had that money extra in their savings account. They made their deposit payment, their down payment, and then they realized, wow, they've got this extra money. They put it towards points. That $3,500 is you saying, I'm going to pay the bank up front for the interest. In return, this may not look like a lot, right? Their payments went from $2,212 to $2,155. But when you look at it over the life of a loan, it goes from $446,000 to $425,000. So that's a good chunk of change that they're saving by putting down $3,500 additional, right? Let's take it a step further. Let's say they had $7,000 extra. Again, this is outside of their down payment, outside of their closing costs. This was just money that they had saved, and they thought it would be a good idea to buy points. So if they were able to buy down their interest rate to 6%, that's, again, it's going to cost them $7,000. But look at what happens during the life of the loan. It goes from $446,000 to $405,000, right? So $40,000 saved just over the 30-year period. That's a huge savings. So it's something to think about. Okay, so when you're purchasing a home, there's a pre-approval and then there's a pre-qualification. As it shows here, qualification just says, here's all the information. Obviously, we have to verify it all. A pre-approval is a lot stronger. That means they're actually going to do the work of investigating and getting you something solid that you can provide when you're purchasing a home. There are closing costs or other fees associated with homeownership that we have to talk about. So your application, your loan origination, inspection fees. Some communities have folks on staff that can do this for folks, and that cuts down that fee. Appraisal fees. Look, a bank is never going to loan you more than a home is worth. So, for example, in the case of manufactured housing, there may not be other homes around for them to be able to evaluate it that way, but they might break it down and look at the home by cost, right? So there's a couple ways that appraisers do this, but there's a fee associated with it, and the banks will charge you. It's what they call a pass-through fee. The bank is going to require it, and you're going to see it in your charges. We talked about points and fees, so that's a good thing. But what is a mortgage payment? It's your principal, right? It's the total amount that you borrowed, right? It's your interest. It's the cost of borrowing those monies, right? The interest rate is a fee that you pay the lender for the use of their funds. So the cost of borrowing money. Taxes, if you're off reservation, then yes, the municipality you live in, county, city, sometimes both, they'll require that you pay taxes. These taxes usually cover things like streets, roads, lights, schools, systems, etc. What you have to know is that they will require that you pay this up front and they keep the money in what's called an escrow account. So the lender, they leave no stone unturned. They want to make sure that you are protecting their investment by making sure your taxes are always paid and your insurance are always paid. If you don't carry insurance, it's forced upon you. That's how important those two elements are to the bank. So taxes, they take that extra money out and put it towards taxes so that no other organization, company, or not company, but in the case of a municipality, there's what we call a tax lien. They don't want that to happen on your property where they have to try to get that back. So it's important to know that that's what pity is all about. That's what it means. But if you are on reservation, then you may not have any sort of tax that's placed upon you. You will have insurance. So that's one of those myths that we have to bust when people come into our classes, because insurance is required. So you will have an escrow payment for your insurance. Insurance also fluctuates. So you have to be careful. Sometimes folks, they're quick to put everything on auto pay and they don't realize their payments may have gone up because of insurance. So most lenders do not allow for a partial payment. So that's something to consider. If they are sending their payments in, but it's not the full amount, then they may have an issue there. When you're talking about homeownership, there's actors, right? There's your lenders, if you're off reservation, maybe realtors. There's your underwriter, right? And then there's, of course, your housing counselor. There's also some terms that we go over, like debt to income, closing costs, down payment, loan product, appraisals, inspections. So this is where I would say it's just a takeaway for you to be able to break it down for your clients. If you've never done a class before and you're interested in learning how to do one or how to break it down, this is a good way to start. Just go with the actors and then go with the terms. When I do these classes, I always like to bring in a little bit of like what's going on in the world. And if your clients are off reservation, then they more than likely do work with an agent or some sort of realtor in the process. And so many people are talking about the National Association of Realtors just set their settlement, right? They assume that that means that they're not going to have to pay the realtors in the process of purchasing a home. And so I wanted to just kind of give you some information on it if you're not familiar, so you can learn more about it. But in general, and you can put it in the chat area, be interested in kind of see how much do you think a agent makes during a transaction? Is it 1%, 2%, 3%? You can put it in the chat. And when I say 1%, I mean of the purchase price, right? So on a $300,000 home, 1%, I got 6%, 2%. All right, while you're putting that in the chat area, so as I said before, the average home is costing, let's say in a tribal community, 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath home is costing roughly 250,000, 300,000. Let's go with 300,000. So 6% of 300,000 is $18,000. That's a lot of money. So the idea was, well, maybe agent fees are too high. Who pays those costs? Let's put that in the chat area. Who pays typically in your communities if they're off reservation? Again, the agent market, there really aren't tribal communities that use agents. Primarily, most folks just go to the housing authority or their housing department. But if you do use an agent, the question in the chat right now is, who do you think pays for the agents in the transaction? There's usually an agent who represents the buyer, and there's usually an agent who represents the seller. The buyer. Okay. Interesting. So it depends, kind of, right? So when it comes to this, different states have different rules regarding agency or who can represent who. But this particular lawsuit had to do with the fact that in some states, Georgia included, where I'm from, Florida included, the seller often pays for both the buyer's agent and the seller's agent. And the argument for it, I'll just give you both sides of the equation. The argument for it is that the seller's interested in selling their home. We want buyers to see the home. So the motivation for buyer's agents is to show the home. So if the seller pays for the buyer's agent, well, then for sure, this will give more access to folks to buy the home. The other thing is, think about what the buyer has to bring to the table already. They're bringing closing costs in a seller's market, which we're in. They're bringing the closing costs, all their appraisal fees, inspection fees, loan origination fees, all the things I talked about earlier. They're bringing their down payment, right? Interest rates are high. They might even be bringing those points we talked about. So that's a lot of money already. and a lot of times they're new to the process. The buyer's agent is going to have to spend a lot of time with them, a lot of energy with them, showing them, again, not 3 houses, but 10, 15 houses in this particular market. So the idea was the seller would pay for both buyer and seller. Obviously, you could always negotiate that. But in most cases, the buyer's agent would be paid at closing along with the seller's agent during the closing cost process. Now, this settlement says we can no longer put in the MLS where we share home information, we can no longer put percentages. This has to be a negotiation between the buyer and the seller. The seller doesn't have, the perception was that the seller didn't have a choice to not pay. And so that's what's changed. So I'm going to show a video real quick, just kind of giving you the breakdown of what that means and how it might help some of your buyers if they're in off reservation. Just let them know. Also, it might be helpful for your buyers to know that this may be a new cost that they have to, entertain if if, or I should say when they get to this process. Uh-oh.
Estate market. Seismic shift coming in the nation's real estate market. A landmark settlement could change how homes are bought and sold and keep more money in your bank account. CBS's Elise Preston has the details. Elise?
Nancy, it's being called a major turning point in real estate sales. Buyers and sellers potentially being able to negotiate commissions with their agents. It's a positive sign in a challenging market. The standard realtor commission could soon be going away.
Long term, this is a seismic shift in a stodgy old business called real estate.
The National Association of Realtors agreeing to pay $418 million in damages to settle a series of lawsuits alleging it conspired to boost agent commissions. Right now, the U.S. average commission rate is about 5 or 6%, one of the highest in the world. U.S. consumers pay about $100 billion in commissions each year, which could be reduced by 30%.
I think for sellers, you're going to negotiate with your agent to come up with a fee that is reasonable for you. For buyers, it's a game changer. You may decide you don't even want a realtor.
New Jersey-based broker Michael Latman says this is a radical shift for realtors.
Do you foresee brokers and agents leaving the business?
A year from now, we might see 10% or more fewer realtors. Brokers, I think, are going to need to step up in their game in terms of what is their value proposition.
And with historically low inventory and higher mortgage rates, experts say it could take some time to see a drop in home prices.
Now, the settlement has one final hurdle to clear. It has to be approved by the courts, but the new rules could go into effect as early as July. Nancy?
So that could be good news for your buyers that are out there. They may choose not to. I will say that, education is important, right? And if they're getting it from you and they don't necessarily need that level of protection by an agent, then it's an option. But in some cases, it may be that, it's just a slight reduction. But as some people said in the chat, I think, Summer, you were correct, 6%. That's what we experience here in Georgia. 3 going to the seller's agent, 3 going to the buyer's agent. That hopefully it goes down a little bit for folks so it's more affordable. But your agent is responsible for a couple different things. So in addition to researching the home, providing you with with listings, Zillow is not accurate in that it's not an agent, right? So it's not updating every 24 hours or so. So sometimes people send me things and I have to say, sorry, that home is no longer available because it's not actually being updated minute to minute. Whereas the MLS, the multiple listing service, is where realtors find information, agents find information. They determine how much a home is worth using comparable homes in the area. They also pay attention to working with other professionals like your loan officers, your inspectors. So going back to building that team, sometimes the team starts with a realtor and works its way into finding a loan officer. Sometimes the realtor has information on local inspectors that are great and who to stay away from too. And vice versa, right? There are good and bad actors in every profession. So the idea is if you work with a group that's worked well with each other in the past, oftentimes you'll find you'll have a really good team that can help negotiate your offer and get you to closing. So these are the sorts of things you hear about. I'm just giving you a few terms: due diligence, earnest money, financial contingency. These are all the sorts of terms that a realtor will go over with a client. Due diligence just means that you do have a period of time after you've submitted an offer, if it's accepted, that you can go ahead and get your inspection done, see what's good about the home, what may need some work. But that due diligence period is anywhere between, it's again, this is something that's between the buyer and the seller, but could be as little as 3 days, no days. It could be as much as, 5-10 days. The argument is, how long does the seller want to be off the market waiting for the buyer to make a decision? Here in where I live, we find that due diligence is no more than 10 days, but certainly less if agreed upon. Earnest money, It's important to think of it from both perspectives. A seller may not be motivated they don't always know how much a person wants a home. And so one easy way to find out is by how much earnest money is offered. Earnest money just says, I'm willing to give you $2,000 down. It goes towards my down payment, but this is showing you how interested I am. Whereas somebody for the same home may put $5,000 down, right? So it just kind of depends. Earnest money is a way that folks will say, with my offer, I'm going to put a certain amount in escrow. I'm going to give it to the title attorney, or I'm going to give it to the whoever's going to be facilitating the transaction. And of course, it goes towards my down payment once we close, but this shows my interest in the home. And if a seller is motivated, then they'll say, okay, well, great. This works out for me. And then they accept because of it. So there are a lot of terms that you have to go over with your clients, or they will feel lost because it's just things they need to know. Prior to closing, let's go back one. I do want to talk about the closing process in the last few slides that we have. So let's say a person has accepted an offer and now it's time to close. The purpose of closing is transferring ownership between the buyer and the seller. In some states, it's done a little different. You can do it at a attorney's office. You can do it at a title company's office. You can do it at your real estate office there within your tribe, right? So there are a lot of different ways in which it can happen, but the settlement itself is where you settle all the documents needed from both the buyer and the seller. The seller doesn't really have if again, this is off reservation, the seller may not have as many documents. On reservation, there's going to be some documents that happen between the BIA documents and then also your tribal land office. There may be some additional documentation there. But in general, sellers don't have nearly as many paperwork to review than the buyer does, because the buyer is signing their mortgage documentation as well. So that tends to take some time. So the agreements are between you, your lender, the seller, and any other interested parties, right? You review and you sign your loan documents if you're the buyer. You exchange your documents, right? And so sometimes it requires both signatures, sometimes just the one. And then, of course, there's what's called the disbursement of funds. That's when the bank wires the money to the closing attorney or whomever is facilitating the transaction. And then, of course, if it's off reservation, then that property is recorded with the county and the deed is issued. In the case of a tribal member on reservation, that process usually goes through your tribal land management office and your BIA office as well. And then that's it. That's how you close on your home. So in the last couple minutes, I just want to make sure if there are any questions that we get those answered. We talked about a lot today, and I know that you may all have some questions for me in the chat, so I wanted to leave a little bit of time to do that. Any questions regarding the home buying process? I know it's different on every reservation or in every community, and so I'm welcome to give you what I know based on where you're located, or at least provide you with directions as to where to find the information with the local housing agencies that I'm aware of. So yes, of course. So 1099Ks, 1099s, and you are allowed, again, going back to those entrepreneurs in the room, you can purchase a home with a 1099. It just means that you have to file your and make sure that your income is not expensed away, right? Because a lot of times with small businesses, the argument is, I don't want to claim as much, right? You want to keep your tax liability low. So sometimes when that happens, you don't have enough to get approved for a home loan, or it's not enough for a home, right? So, you might get approved for 150,000. Well, in this particular market, even a manufactured home is in that 200, 250 price range. Let's see. Hopefully that answers your question. Let's see. Any other questions in the chat? Okay, awesome, Tiara. Appreciate it. With the time that I have left, I'm going to send it back over to the Native Learning Center. I do want to say thank you for being here today. Hopefully this was helpful to you. And in the meantime, I will put the NADL contact information in the chat.
All right. Thank you so much for that incredible webinar, Marie. That was a lot of helpful information, a ton. I'm going to go ahead and launch our webinar feedback survey. If you guys could all just take a minute to fill out the survey that just popped up on your screen. It helps us to keep doing more of what's working, and it helps us to become aware of anything that maybe needs some improvement. Feel free to be as candid as you like. We do, it's an anonymous survey, so we do share the feedback results with our instructors, so it helps them as well. It is good all around. There we go. And we invite you to join us for our next webinar if you're available. It's actually going to be tomorrow, April 11th. This is going to be about preparing for the small business journey in Indian country, presented by Russ Siegel. He does this really cool extended metaphor where he compares starting your small business to going on a hiking trip. So it's really cool, and registration is free as always. You can access this and any of our other recorded webinars online on our website at nativelearningcenter.com. There's a Kathita webinar section, and in that there is a recorded webinars portion. So there's about 2 years of archives on there, so feel free to view them, share them with your colleagues, share them with your friends. And we also invite you to check out our upcoming events. They will be posted to our various social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we have a podcast titled the Hopathanga Native American Podcast. We produce that in-house, and we discuss more focused topics within Native American housing and self-determination. You could listen to that on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And you could even view the video recordings with our guests on YouTube. And it looks like we have a question. Yeah, Summer, if you have registered for today's webinar, it will generate a certificate and send it to you after the close of the webinar. If you have any issues, though, I'm going to put my email into the chat as well. Here we go. All right, guys, once again, thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you, Marie, for another incredible webinar. Your work is always pristine. And I am going to go ahead and close down the webinar recording, folks. And I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of the day. And we hope to connect with you again really soon.